Welcome to Defending the Biblical Roots of Christianity. And as you know, we are an apologetics ministry, and we typically are dealing with defending biblical Christianity from other false theologies or unbiblical teachings. But today, I'm excited because we're going to widen our conversation. It's not only important to defend our faith, but also we want to talk about sharing our faith. And I'm excited because we have something of a master apologist joining us today. And he's got a new book out that we're going to talk about, which is called How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot, which I think he wrote just for me. And the subtitle's great, A Panic-Free Guide to Having Natural Conversations About Your Faith. So with that, let's invite on, all the way from beautiful England, Dr. Andy Bannister. Welcome, sir.
Welcome. Great, Rob. Thank you for the welcome. Always great to talk to someone who appreciates England. So lovely to chat with you today.
Great, thanks. You just reminded me of a funny story that I hadn't even thought of for years. But the first time I went to England, I was 18 years old. I played drums in the marching band. So we had like a school band excursion. And being 18 years old at the time, and this was in the 1980s, the things I was most interested in London were things like Madame Tussauds Wax Museum and the Hammersmith Odeon where Iron Maiden played. Those are the things I wanted to see. And Stratford on Avon? No, I'm not interested. Anyway, it was funny.
Absolutely great choices. If you're going to come all that way across the Atlantic, come and see where Iron Maiden played. I would, yes. What else would
right? Yeah. Since then, my interests have broadened, as you would hope.
Very good.
But anyway, yeah. So I'm excited to have you on to talk about your book. But first, before we kind of get into things, just so our viewers know who they're hearing from, let us know a little bit about yourself and the kind of the ministry work you're doing or the apologetic work that you're involved in.
Yeah, so thanks for that invitation, Rob. So Andy Bannister is the name. I was born and raised in London, so capital of the UK. Raised in a Christian home, in a Baptist home. You don't have to be a Baptist to go to heaven, but why take chances? That's my question to you today. And But like many kids raised in that kind of background, it took me a while to find my own faith, not my parents' faith. So my late teens, that happened. And then in my early 20s, I began having what I didn't know the word at the time, but apologetic conversations, particularly with Muslims. London is a very diverse city. And so I had a lot of Muslim friends. And so that led me to trying preaching on the street and sort of sharing my faith with Muslims and others. Learned lots that way. God used that process to then lead me to Bible college. So I went and did 3 years studying theology and philosophy, and then a PhD in Islamic studies because I really want to understand my Muslim friends. Then my wife and I moved to Canada for 6 years to work with an organization out there. And then we came back to the UK in 2016 and took over the leadership of the organization I now lead, which is called Solas. And Solas is the Scots word, the Gaelic word for light, actually related to the English word solar. So we have the same idea in English. And so Solas, really, we do two things in the organization. The first thing, Rob, we do is we take the message of Jesus out of the four walls of churches and into places where people are. And part of the philosophy behind that, a good American institution, think of Starbucks. Well, the founder of Starbucks talked about Starbucks being a third place between work and home. And we find that in evangelism, if you go to those third places, it's not the church, nor is it people's homes, but it's the place where people frequent, the coffee shop, the restaurant, the curry house, the right. workplace, the school, the university. There's a huge opportunity, actually, for evangelism in those spaces. It's very easy to invite your friends to an event at a coffee shop. So we do a lot of evangelism in those kind of spaces and seen real fruit from that. And then the other half of what we do is teaching and training Christians how to feel more confident in sharing their faith with their friends. And you obviously use the word apologetics. We do a lot of that. We find we don't use that word so much because if you don't know what it means, it's a scary word. So we talk a lot about persuasive evangelism. So evangelism that's persuasive, that engages people. And we get excited about empowering Christians to be able to talk about Jesus at work, with their unchurched family, at school, wherever that is, because we've got such a mission opportunity, actually, as a Christian in the workplace, if you can learn a few basic tools. So that's sort of that's not what we do. And I've been doing that with Solas for the last 7 years, but as I admit personally myself now, something like 20 years, actually, which makes me, I guess, really, really old.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's great. So, folks like you who are intellectually curious and academically trained and out there in the world sharing the gospel, to me, for me personally, it's a big source of inspiration and, bolsters my faith. Because a lot of times, especially today in our scientific modern era, there's a lot of questions, and I don't know, I'm assuming it's somewhat similar in the UK, but there's sort of a sense of, well, we've got science, why do we need God kind of conversation when you're just out in those third places, unless someone's already spiritually inclined. So it's really great to be able to, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was sorry, Rob. I thought you paused for breath.
No.
All I was going to say is that two things are going on in the UK, I think, and I'd be interested to actually hear from you whether it's the same on your side of the pond. You do have those older sort of questions about faith, that come from a more sort of modernistic environment, culture. So the science questions, can you prove the Bible, those kind of things. And we engage with those, and they're definitely out there. I would say the UK culture has shifted, actually, in the last 10 years in particular, in a couple of ways. Firstly, the questions that we're getting would be far more, I guess, existential. So questions about meaning and hope and suffering. So, a lot more questions along the lines of, the world is in chaos. We've got Israel and Gaza, we've got a war in Ukraine, financial crashes, environmental meltdown. Is there any hope for the future? We get a lot of those kind of questions. And boy, those are great questions, because I think that Christianity has a lot to say. And then I think we also encounter a lot of people who, if you ask them, would tick the no religion box on a census. They would say, I'm not interested in God, I'm not religious, I'm not Christian, but I'm not anything else. But actually, when you scratch the surface, you find there's a lot going on. So we do a lot of events, I think, designed to engage those sort of, spiritual but not religious types. And I think there's a lot of scope there. I think it's a very exciting time to be an evangelist. Actually.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So I'm not as on the streets, so to speak, as you are. And, in a country of 300 million people, I only have one small perspective. But what I see in America is, in the younger generation, there is an openness to a spirituality. We see this in New Ageism and astrology and those sorts of things, where people are understanding or open to the idea of the supernatural that doesn't scare them off. Something, immaterial that's out there. But what I notice a lot in, and I'll say just in non-unfaith communities, whatever you want to call it, is that there's a very strong resistance to the attaching of that spirituality to the Christian version of God, so to speak, because a lot of it for us, honestly, from what I've seen and the folks I've talked to, a lot of it is sort of a moral pushback on sexual things of a sexual nature, the movements that are undergoing right now, LGBTQ, and how do we treat those folks and how can we reject them? And those sorts of questions become central, especially with the younger demographic. Do you guys deal with that as well?
Very much so. I think there's a lot of that going on. Although even in the UK, I would say I think we're on the tail end of that trend. So I do a lot of one of the big things that happens in the UK is every year around about this time of year we go through a season of university missions. So most universities have a campus Christian group on them. Those campus groups will do a week of outreach, and it's usually the first 3 months of the year. So this is a very busy time for folks like myself. I've been on a lot of universities in the last 3 months and spoken to hundreds and hundreds of students, and it's really fun, but boy is it tiring. And every year, some of the big campus ministries track the questions that are coming through, because it's good to see what the trends are.
Oh, that's cool.
And I would say some of the LGBTQIA plus kind of stuff, we're beginning to see that drop off slightly. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. One reason is there's a bit of a pushback happening in culture. So on the transgender piece, as Christians actually in the UK, we don't need to say anything. It's the feminists, the secular feminists, who are fighting that battle. So we just stand back and watch.
Sure.
But also, I think a lot of young people would just take it as a given that, same-sex marriage is a thing. So it's actually not a question they're coming with. Obviously, if as a Christian you lead with that, you're going to run into issues. But actually, what's going to happen is people are discovering it a bit later on. It becomes a question, but it's not the first question through the door. But then the other thing I think we've learned to do is one of my favorite passages in Scripture, Rob, would be Acts 17, where Paul is in Athens. He wanders around
Yeah.
Athens, sees all the statues and the temples and the pagan polytheistic paraphernalia, and you'd expect him as a first century Jew to get very animated about this. But if you remember the speech he gives down at the Areopagus, he starts very positively. He starts by saying, I admired how religious you lot are. It's really quite impressive. And then I saw this statue to the unknown God, and let me tell you about that. And I think we can take that template for a lot of issues. So when I meet somebody who is coming from that sexuality, sexuality is the question they're leading with, I'll often try and say, well, hang on, let's just slow down a minute. Let's first of all chat a little bit. Tell me about why sexuality and these issues matter to you and what your thinking is. And then one thing I found unnerves people is when you go, do you know what? I admire the fact that for you, sexuality is sacred. I admire the fact that you think sex really matters, because as a Christian, I agree with you, actually. It's not just reproduction for the next generation. There's more to it than that. I agree, it is tied up with our identity. And immediately you've wrong-footed somebody because you said something positive.
Right.
And you've gone
very
now.
Act 17.
Very accented. Now, so you and I then say we may have some different views on what sexuality means and some of the implications, but let's at least affirm a starting point. But the question I would have for you is, why is it that you think that sexuality is sacred? You see, as a Christian, I believe that you're made in the image of God. I believe that you have infinite value and dignity. I think the Bible is very clear on that. But I think outside of a Christian framework, I don't see how you get from we are just the result of time plus chance plus natural selection to my sexual identity really matters. Can you help me understand how you've done that? Because I think that the pathway back towards a conversation around Christianity is, if you think that our values and our identity and our personhood really matters, Christianity is the only home where that's going to work, even though there are some big disagreements along the way. And then the other piece I'll often try and bring in is I've also found saying to people, look, if you follow Jesus, that will have an implication for your life choices. It's got to, because if once you recognize that he is Lord and we're not, then everything flows from that. But I apologize that sometimes Christians put the cart before the horse. And I totally get, if I go bouncing up to my gay friend and go, right, before Jesus is interested in you, you need to renounce your lifestyle.
That's not the gospel.
That's the problem. And actually, if we're not careful, we're now being Pharisees. We're trying to be Pharisees, really. Of like, could you clean your life up such that Jesus will be accepted? Jesus will accept you, rather than, are you willing to give Jesus a look? And then are you willing to see where that leads? And the great thing is then if somebody says, but what about sex? I can go, what about sex? Ultimately, my job is to introduce you to Jesus. And then I want, as you start following him, for you and he to figure out together what that looks like, rather than me tell you what that looks like.
That's beautiful.
You could slightly draw a circle around some of those obstacles. I don't want anyone to hear me to be saying that sexuality is not unimportant. I think it's massively important. But sometimes we put those gospel issues, we put the cart, as it were, before the horse. Another one that's not dissimilar to this sometimes is abortion, that we have a particular set of views on abortion that flow out of what we believe as Christians. And unless somebody has that inner heart transformation, they're going to struggle to see our viewpoint on things. It's a little bit easier on abortion because I think you can come at it through the value of life. But if you're dealing with somebody who is genuinely, utterly atheistic and thinks that life is just an accident anyway, until they have that heart transformation, they're not going to see from a Christian perspective. And we need to be very careful as Christians that we're not asking people to behave morally like Christians, even while they haven't had their heart transformed by Christ.
Yeah, exactly. That's a beautiful way to look at it, because the problem, I think, happens on both sides of the discussion when Christians start to feel like they need to be the moral police. And that's not at all our job. I was reading a Christian philosopher, a last name of Cohn, and he was talking about, and he makes a fairly strong case for the fact that there's really only one moral or ethical mandate for non-believers, and that's to believe. And so we shouldn't be trying to, like Paul, he could have said, how dare you have all these statues to other gods? He didn't try to topple their faith system. He found a door through which to introduce them to Jesus. And that's
Yeah,
beautiful. And I think that puts our heart in the right place, because we're talking, like you just described, the word that kept coming to mind was relationship. I want you to have your own relationship with Jesus. I'm not going to preach to you from the outside, because I know the Holy Spirit can speak much more eloquently to you from inside
yeah,
than I could ever yell at you from
yeah.
outside. So I think that's beautiful and very
I
Christ-like.
think so. And I think, by the way, I'm also really encouraged that you mentioned the Holy Spirit there as well, Rob. Because I think there's two pieces for those of us who love apologetics. I love it, and you love it, and lots of people listen to your show probably enjoy it. It's a wonderful gift, and it's a wonderful tool for God's kingdom, and it's thoroughly biblical. 1 Peter 3:15, and so on. The danger for those of us who love the life of the mind, the thing just to be aware of. Firstly, is to remember it's the Spirit who draws people to Christ. My arguments,
Yes.
your arguments. I think one theologian I really have liked, warmed to over the years. So one of C.S. Lewis's best friends at Oxford University was a Anglican theologian called Austin Farrer. And I'm going to mangle his quotation terribly, but Austin on one occasion said words to the effect of, he said, arguments cannot create faith, but they can create a climate in which faith is considered possible. So if our friends from the outside go, I couldn't be a Christian because I need to hang my brains up at the door and it's all irrational, it's very hard for them to consider faith. But if through
Right.
arguments and apologetics and this stuff, we can go, look, can you at least see that it's possible to be a thinking Christian? Okay, I begin to understand this now. Then that's created a space in which they might be willing to consider the things of the gospel. But it's still the Holy
Right.
Spirit's role. Then the other piece as well, by the way, that we sometimes forget as keen apologists, the power of prayer as well. And so I always think we need
Amen.
to be remembering that actually, if we just have arguments, it's like the valley of dry bones in Ezekiel. We've got a very pretty skeleton if all we've got is arguments.
Right.
But if we pray that God's Spirit breathes in to those arguments and puts flesh on them, and then the thing begins moving, then it becomes
Yes.
persuasive. So
Yes.
let's remember
That's so
arguments,
important.
prayer, and the Spirit.
I hear from a lot of folks for our particular brand of apologetics, which deals with folks who believe the old covenant law is still 100% binding on Christians today. So it's not a total rejection of Christianity. They accept Jesus, they accept the New Testament. But the problem I hear from families, from spouses, even from pastors who are dealing with this is they feel completely unable to do anything. And I'll often respond, you are unable to do anything except perhaps pray, because that's the biggest, and it's not a trite thing to tell someone to keep praying, coming to God faithfully for this person, for the scales to fall off their eyes, to see their freedom in Christ. Because prayer, I think, really is our most powerful tool. And
Yes.
sometimes we tend to downplay it. But
Yeah.
I love that you said that.
Yeah, no. And the other thing, by the way, I like about prayer, obviously the book that you mentioned in the introduction, the kind of the idiot book, my daughter loves to call it. My 11-year-old daughter says, "Daddy, that's the idiot book." So the idiot book.
That's why it's
One
for
of the
me.
things that's all about, that's all about having everyday conversations about our faith, and you can use your apologetics in those. One thing I often come across, Rob, is that Christians can sometimes sort of feel, oh gosh, how do I even start these conversations in the first place? We take tremendous pressure on our shoulders, and then when things don't appear to work, in inverted commas, we beat ourselves up spiritually. But if you start
Right.
with prayer, you start by praying, Lord, would you bring across my path today, this week, the people that you would have me talk to? Would you create those opportunities for me? Then if an opportunity doesn't arise that day, you can actually just breathe easy, because you have asked the Lord and the answer has been wait. Today was not the day. Often, on the other hand, you pray that prayer and obvious opportunities come across your door and you don't move into them. Then I think you need to repent, because you prayed
Yeah.
and God answered. But if we start with prayer, it reminds us that actually we need God to create those opportunities for us. It's not our clever rhetoric, our clever words. And I always find actually
Yeah.
the more you pray those prayers, the more the opportunities do appear to materialize.
Right. And fortunately, if we miss an opportunity, God's fresh the next day with a new one. So we
Absolutely.
can
And you
learn over
everyone.
time to lean in. Okay, so let's kind of talk a little bit about the book. So I had one thought I was kind of preparing to come on air with you, and it's sort of a subtext question. So the name of the book,
Yes.
How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot, presumes that there's a cultural sense of feeling inadequate or idiotic in broaching those conversations. Is that something that you've come across a lot and realized was a
Yeah.
problem that needed to kind of be addressed?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, two things about the title is quite fun. That title, actually, I first came across it came up with it back in, I think, about 2014. So I was working in Canada at the time. I was going to go and do a seminar at a big missions conference up in Manitoba, in the middle of Canada, and they were going to call it something really, really boring, like, sort of how to have practical conversations about Jesus with your friends and neighbors and co-workers in a way that's meaningful and persuasive and engaging. It was a monster of a title. And so
Right.
we had a Zoom call with myself and two of the organizers, and we were brainstorming better titles. And between us, I can't remember who actually came up with the exact formulation. We came up with with this title, the idiot title, tried it out on that event, and it was wildly popular. And then every time I've done that title since in a seminar, wherever I'm speaking, people flock to it, which told me I was onto something. Then I thought back, Rob, to my own spiritual journey. And so my first job, after leaving high school, I didn't go to university till I was 28. In the meantime, one of my first jobs was working for the local hospital, working for a health service in the UK, organising medical conferences. So I went into health administration, and I loved the job at the hospital. I had a brilliant boss. It was a great place to work and learn stuff for my first job. I was there 6 years. But when I was working for the hospital, I was an undercover Christian, is the title I use in the book. So outside work, very involved in my church. Inside work, said nothing, shut up, kept my head down, zipped my lip, did not talk about my faith. And looking back on that period, I realize fear was the issue. I was afraid of looking stupid. I was afraid of making the gospel look bad, of saying something so useless that it did more damage. I was afraid of being asked questions I couldn't answer. I didn't know about apologetics, and I was afraid of all kinds of things. And since then, of having talked to, and trained thousands and thousands of people, I realized that is a very common fear. Yes, there are some bold loudmouths out there. And if you're a bold loudmouth listening to this podcast, you know who you are. But most of us are not, Rob. And here's the other thing as well. I also began to realize even people who, are evangelizing for a living, they're full-time evangelists, or they're pastors, they are, professional Christians, they still run into the same issue when talking to the next door neighbor. And so one of the things I say to people now, yes, I'm an evangelist full-time, but it's still as hard for me to talk to my next door neighbor or the person I meet at the bus stop or whatever, because you're on that one-to-one basis. You're not on a platform. You haven't got some pretext to be there. You've got to figure out how to start the conversations and build the relationships. So it's a massive issue.
Yeah, it's a whole different context.
It's a whole different context. Fear, I think, is one of the number one things that holds people back. And then the other thing we discovered, we did a bit of sort of market research, the publisher, as we were playing around with this idea, we sort of stumbled across the sort of reality that the people who buy books with the word evangelism or apologetics on the cover are those who are doing it anyway half the time. How do you reach people who, if they see a book with a title, Better Evangelism or whatever, would go, oh, well, I'm not an evangelist. That's not my gift, and would leave it. And so we wanted to write a book that somebody would go, oh, man, that is what I need. That's my fear. And I've been so encouraged in the first few months this book has been out. That's the stories we're hearing from people who it's been sort of transformative in people saying, oh, I suddenly realize that here are some tools and some methods that I could use to just start those conversations. And my prayer is that it starts conversations and then people are away.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Is there anything in the book that people have been surprised to learn?
Oh, that's a good question. I think people are surprised by some of the terrible humor that it's, because I like a joke or two. So some of the footnotes, there are some really bad dad jokes in there, I tell you. So if you like British humor, you want to buy this book and read the footnotes, because there are some really old toe curling ones. Although, joking aside, I wanted to make a book that people would have fun reading, and it wouldn't feel like you were reading a textbook, that you would feel that you were having somebody who is having a bit of laugh with you over a coffee and helping you a bit. I think the thing I was surprised by writing the book, and I think I've had quite a few people say since, is that the big idea in the book is learn to ask good questions. I mean, that's the big idea in a nutshell. That's not unique to me. There've been other books playing around with that for years and years and years, but I think I put it in a very accessible way. But one of the things that I did in the book was I thought, okay, let's start with Jesus, because I think as an apologist, I always want to start with Jesus and end with Jesus, and that applies to apologetic method. And when I dived down into the Gospels, I was blown away, Rob, how many darn questions Jesus asks. I knew he asked a lot. I was not prepared as I went through and did that study. And I think it's 307 questions Jesus asks in the Gospels. The Gospels are saturated in questions, and you can learn so much. And I think sometimes what's interesting over the years, I've been in sort of seminars or read books that sort of have given the impression, well, when we're thinking about evangelism, we go to the early church, because we'll go to the book of Acts. Let's look how Paul does it and the early Christians do it. But looking at how Jesus does it, I think is actually really interesting, because we can learn an awful lot. And then when you look at Jesus, you see a whole number of things. You see someone who practiced hospitality, was a big thing. You know, hospitality and food and meals were a big part of the outreach of Jesus. When you look at when he's reaching, those whose society is thrown aside, he was a massive asker of questions because I think he saw the power of them, and he was a storyteller as well. And I think it's interesting, actually. Some of us, particularly those of us in the more reformed and conservative end of Christianity, which would be my tribe, in that part of the church, we can often like our propositional truths. We like a sermon to have 4 really good, solid points, that all connect philosophically. And bang, along comes Jesus, and he can do that when he wants to. But it's like, no, I'm going to tell you a story. And I think that's one of the things we are missing, I think, in a lot of contemporary apologetics and evangelism. I first saw that back by the way in the days of the new atheism. Why was it the books people like Richard Dawkins and Chris Hitchens and Dan Dennett, why were they so influential? Because they could write really well, and they told good stories, and they knew the power of a story, and they were using it for the wrong side of the discussion. Perhaps as Christians, we need to rediscover the power of how do we take really big truths and big ideas, but communicate them in stories and in relationship and through questions in a way that draws people in.
Yeah, Jesus was the master rabbi in the way he taught.
It certainly was,
it's amazing. It's also interesting in terms of apologetics, how he doesn't follow or I should maybe say the gospel writers didn't give us the account of Jesus following an argument all the way to its conclusion. He would often throw something out there, a question, and let it sink into the user or to the listener. And so you think about, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he says, do these things. And he says, I've done them since I was a child. Okay, well, here's some other things that you should do. And his other things were obviously going to the heart of this young man's problem. Yeah. And it just says he went away sad. Jesus didn't chase him down until he changed his mind. And that's really interesting.
But even that story, Rob, is interesting because that's got a question at the heart of it. The bit between those two segments, the talk about good and the talk about money, if you remember, Jesus, the young man, the rich guy, comes to Jesus and says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus' immediate response is, "Why do you call me good? Only God is good." Yeah. Which is a brilliant question. And it's a really weird question the more you think about it, because you or I wouldn't use that. If your neighbor knocked on your door and you opened the door and they said, "Good Christian, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" You would say, "Come on in, what an opportunity." But Jesus, "Why do you call me good? Only God is good." But then you think about it, that's a brilliant answer. It's a brilliant question, because Jesus basically says to the young man, "You know what, you're absolutely right. All good people are going to heaven, essentially. But here's the problem. Who is good?" Answer, only God. So only God gets to go, I'm afraid.
Only God.
Next question. And, that blows this whole young man's framework out of the window. And I think my hunch is that young guy is coming in boasting, actually, quite frankly. Look at all the things I've done. What do I need to do to gain eternal life? I've kept all these commandments. And then Jesus has to get to the heart issue. And he gets there with a a question. And so, I think questions can be very powerful stories too. And again, perhaps one example of this would be, you earlier mentioned sexuality. How is it that the LGBT community, although being a minority, have so managed to transform culture? And I think the answer is partly stories. Rather than come out with arguments, they tell you stories. Rather than give you three propositional arguments as to why they think two guys ought to be married, they'll tell you a story. Here's a
Right.
soldier who's come back from fighting Afghanistan, and he comes off the aeroplane, I think it was one of the adverts, and he meets his male lover, and they embraced on the runway, and everyone goes, oh, it's amazing. Isn't it a wonderful story? My heart is moved. Of course, we should have equal marriage.
Yeah.
And they go, that's not
Right.
an argument, it's a story. But it's a very powerful story. And then Christians, we try and fight that with proposition. Well, hang on a minute. Let me give you a logical definition of marriage and tell you three reasons why you're wrong. And I think if you try and fight story with arguments, it's tough. I'm not saying you can't do it. The philosopher in me wants to do it. But you can see people looking at you going, but there's a story and you've just given me arguments. So there's a challenge for us, I think, isn't there, as followers of Jesus? How do we hold on to truth? Absolutely hold on to truth. But how do we find ways of communicating?
There's no stronger apologetic than a changed life.
Absolutely.
Right? So the story of someone whose life has changed because they met Christ is going to be more powerful than any logical argument. So I agree with you. And I think we're on the same page as far as apologetics, and especially intellectual apologetics is a powerful tool, but it has its place. And it does. To me, it bolsters the faith of the faithful to know that there are good reasons to believe what we believe. But also there are people out there. And there are people out there who do have those intellectual problems. And like you said, we can't really solve them. And sort of to paraphrase another popular apologist, our job is sort of to clear away those untruths and myths so people can see God for who he really is, for the Bible, for what it really says, and deal with that directly without being, having their view distorted.
Very much so. And I completely agree. I think there are. Yeah, I would say there are those two roles to apologetics, aren't there? There is the encouraging the individual disciple, and as they follow Christ, and there's the engaging folks outside. But just very quickly, on the story thing, I always find myself asking, Rob, why is it that C.S. Lewis was so influential? I mean, why is it we're talking about the guy, 60 years after his death? What was it? I mean, his arguments were good, but there are equally people around today whose arguments that you could argue are better because philosophy has moved on. I think it's because Lewis understood three things. He understood arguments and did it well. He understood the need to engage people's hearts, and many people do that today quite well. But the piece that he brought that we are often missing today in the apologetic world, and I include myself in this, is the imagination. C.S. Lewis got that you need to engage people's imagination. If you get them there, then you're onto something. And then of course that's not a new idea. Blaise Pascal in the 1700s, I think 1700s, said preach the gospel in such a way that good people wish that it were true. In other words, people are that this is incredible, I would want this to be true, and then show them that it is. But often we go straight to the showing rather than the getting them wishing.
That's beautiful. I think pretty sure it's Mere Christianity opens with a story about people arguing while they're in a queue somewhere about who was right and who was wrong, or I can't remember what it was, but he does draw you into his arguments by putting you in the middle of a story that's telling, and even some of his other books, like Till We Have Faces. And anyway, hold on. We're on limited time, and now I'm just
digressing into Louisville, and we could do this for ages. So bring us back, Rob. Bring us back.
Yeah, let me bring us back to your book, because you bring up stories, and I think that's a brilliant point. Is part of the framework that you propose for idiots like me dealing in story and sharing personal testimony and those sorts of things? Is that part of the book?
Yeah. So some of what I go into in the book. I mean, I wish if I was every author, when they finish a book, right, you look at it and you go, there are things I wish I'd done, and I wish I'd had a bit more on testimony, but there's stuff in there on that. So I think I would say the book really majors on three things. Firstly is questions, and learning to ask them, and learning to learn how to ask particular types of questions and to listen well. Secondly, I think is, how do you then within that, share your story or the stories of others? And I agree, by the way, stories are very powerful. So, we've used this as an example through our conversation. Take that LGBT topic. I found it very powerful, actually, to have in my armory the stories and the testimonies of Christians who were same-sex attracted, and to then, have lived biblically faithful lives, because that is far more powerful. So someone like Sam Albury, good friend of mine, now living in, I think that Sam's now in Nashville, actually. And I believe so. And so, so Sam is is a pastor. He's same-sex attracted, but he's single. He's living a biblically faithful life. But his books on what it means to follow Christ when coming from that background, that is far more powerful than anything I'm going to share, because the story is so powerful. Or Rosaria Champagne Butterfield, her story of coming from being a left-wing Marxist, atheist, lesbian literary professor, I think, to following Christ. I mean, that story is a page-turner. Or in the Muslim arena, Nabil Qureshi's book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. That book just
his story is amazing.
Because I mean, I know Nabil. I knew Nabil. He's a friend of mine. But when that book first came out, I sat up all night reading it. It's such a good story. So stories are important. And then the last piece I also teach, I think, in the book is the importance of ensuring that our character, lives up to our words too. Because I think if people's first encounter of us is that we're harsh, we're like that resounding cymbal that just clangs away at people, we don't listen, we don't care about those that we're sharing with, people will turn their noses up and walk away, and quite rightly. And there's a very famous evangelist here in the UK in the late 1800s, evangelist to Roma people, to gypsies, a guy called Gypsy Smith. And Gypsy Smith famously said, there are 5 gospels, not 4 gospels, 5 gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the life of the individual Christian. Most people will not read the first 4. And his point being is that as people read our lives and encounter us, and this is thoroughly gospel-centered, because Jesus said, be salt and light. As people encounter you, encounter me, encounter those listening, and go, there is something about that person, the way that person treated me, the way that Christian cared for me, the way that I was totally rude to them at work about their faith, and they didn't insult back, they just smiled and made me a coffee. Okay, what is going on with you lot? So I think those 3 things together: learn to ask questions well, learn to be able to explain our story and what Christ has done for us, be able to be a faithful witness in terms of character. And by the way, if you want to, I suppose, add a 4th, but there's other books on this. Know some of your apologetics. When questions come up, you can say, that's a really good question. I wonder if you've thought about this answer. And by the way, questions and apologetics I've learned, even that thing I did there, I learned from somebody else, of going, sometimes somebody asks a question, you can be tempted to go, oh, I've heard this one before, I know the answer. And then you're a bit sort of like a machine. Whereas if you say to the other person, that's a really good question, just out of interest, why do you ask that? What is it about that question that intrigues you? Find out a bit where they're coming from, and then frame your answer as, do you know, it's a really good question, but I wonder if you've considered this possibility. And then you share your answer. You don't come across then as arrogant. You don't come across as, oh, you poor naive fool, let me correct you. You're framing your answer conversationally. And I found people are more willing to hear you when you frame things that way.
And then it's a personalized thing, not a copy and paste like you're talking about with.
Correct.
Because I'm sure you go through the same thing that I do. I get probably the same 20 questions in some form or another, are very consistent. So I could copy and paste an answer when I'm talking to someone. And sometimes I'll even do that online because the questions are so common. But when I'm sitting across the table from somebody, I want to know their story. Curiosity is a very important part of, and you didn't use that word, but I kind of hear that's what you're describing. This curiosity, genuine, not feigning just so you can have your chance to take a swing, but genuinely curious about the human being that God loves that's answering that question, or asking that question. Yeah.
I like that. That's a good word, Rob. I like the word. It's not the word I would naturally use, actually. But I think, curiosity. If we're genuinely interested in others. And by the way, if you are listening to this and you're thinking, but I'm not genuinely interested in others, because it's not all of us have that. What a prayer to pray. Right. To pray, Lord, would you give me that gift of the next person I meet, to just be really interested in them? Because the more you're interested in them, the more they're likely to be interested in you, and you've built a bridge you can drive the gospel across.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's another C.S. Lewis quote, and I'm going to butcher it as well, but he said something about, you've never locked eyes with someone that's not an immortal soul.
That's a paraphrase of that. I couldn't get it right either, but it's that I know where it's from. It's from The Weight of Glory.
Yes. Yeah.
You've never.
But what a reminder that this person I'm happen to be sitting next to on the bus isn't a brain to be won over or convinced. It's a human being that's got an eternal destiny, and God has given me an opportunity. And it's interesting because you're right that you have to cultivate the awareness, and prayer is the way to do that, but cultivate the awareness that you have a job in God's kingdom as well. Everyone does, like what's that famous book by Sproul? Everyone's a theologian, right?
Yes.
So everyone in the sense is an apologist or an evangelist to a
Yeah.
degree. We don't need to be professionals,
Yeah.
but there are reasons that God puts us in proximity with folks. And sometimes our job, and I don't know if you go into this in the book, but sometimes our job is to plant the seed. Sometimes it's to water the seed,
Yes.
and sometimes it's to yield the harvest.
I do talk about that in the book a bit. I mean, two thoughts very quickly there, just on that brief point, Rob. I think the first thing is that model you've described there, and one of the things I talk about, I think, in the book somewhere, is that all of us, if we think about how we came to faith in Christ, probably for all of us, there were multiple people involved, different friends, different pastors, different people who God used to bring us to faith in Christ. Very few people come to Christ through one single encounter with somebody. And that tells me that you're absolutely right. Evangelism is a team sport. So whatever your gifting is, use that for God's kingdom, knowing it's not all down to you. You might have one interaction with somebody, and then 3 months later, another Christian comes into their life, and that takes things forward. So that takes the pressure off. And the other thing, taking an interest, the other thing I like about working on that is also something that requires no skill to do. So somebody who's like a young person, if you're listening to this, or you've got kids listening to this, you're a Christian parent or grandparent, rather than go, oh gosh, okay, I'm 10 years old, or you're 10 years old, you're too young to do this. Anyone can learn to take an interest. We can be training our kids. Take an interest in your classmates. Just be someone who takes an interest in others. When I was first getting more into evangelism and sort of really relearning the art of this, one of the things I would do when I was in things like an Uber, I would always go, okay, on my 15-minute ride, how much can I find out about my driver? It might not get to evangelism. I might get not beyond what else he does other than driving cabs and the country he was born in, his family and his interests. But I'm practicing.
Right.
And the more I found I took an interest in others, the more actually then people say to me, oh, so what do you do then, Andy? And what an opportunity to go, well, this is what I do. Or what are you into? Well, I'm into a number of things. I'm into mountain climbing, juggling, and God.
Trifecta.
The trifecta. But taking an interest in others. So I always say to anyone listening to this who's a bit nervous, start just by taking an interest. The next interaction where you have with somebody, try and make it more than a 30-second interaction. Make it a 2-minute interaction and find out about them. Be the person in your office who knows all of your colleagues' backstories. You know their kids' names. You know their grandparents' names. You can follow up on things. If they've said that one of their kids was sick last week, make sure you remembered that. And you're like, so how's your son? You told me last week he was unwell. I was praying for him, actually. Is he any better? You'll be amazed how that care for people opens up gospel opportunities, because people will see you really do take an interest. So yeah, it's a real spiritual gift to cultivate, Rob.
And it's interesting because the more you lean in and become curious and ask questions and try to learn, what you're learning is their story, and their stories are always interesting. So it becomes self-perpetuating. It's just making the first step, the first effort. So one thing I've noticed in my professional career, when I worked in a big office, in our office, the work I did was more or less software development design. I felt like the world came to me. We had people from China, from Russia, from India, all in the same office. And it became a little bit, in my mind, it was sort of a mission field. But there's this strange, at least here in the States, there's this, I remember so I went up to the receptionist my first week there, and I said, do we have any Bible studies going on in the office? And I got the most quizzical look, like, why would we possibly have a Bible study in the office, because this is a secular whatever. So anyway, I had to try to find my way. How do I talk to folks? And I'm just naturally curious. Like whenever I travel, I want the local food and to learn a few words in the local language just to be part of what it is. So I found in doing that in my office, I was able to say good morning in a bunch of languages and talk to people about where they're from, and ended up talking to a guy who was raised Hindu but had become an atheist, who then came with me to a Nashville rescue mission, which was, a Christian outreach. And so you have these unique opportunities. So I'm curious if your book talks about any of those. So it's not necessarily talking to a nun, None, not a Nun.
N-U-N.
But talking to someone who is already sort of committed, like Nabil was. David Wood came in and worked with him. But
that's right. What a story.
Do you have anything in the book about talking to folks who are of another
Yeah.
persuasion or belief system?
Well, I'm hugely passionate about that, not least because of the Islam connection that I mentioned at the start. And in fact, the book I wrote before this one was a popular book on Islam called "Do Christians and Muslims Worship the Same God?" And that book partly sets out to answer that question, but also partly to actually be a conversation starter with Muslims. So in this book, there are quite a few examples of how you might use the questions that I teach with Muslims, mainly Muslims. I think there's one Buddhist story in there somewhere, but it's one kind of New Age story. There's one of my favorite stories of the book is there was a time I was at Toronto Airport waiting for a flight to Vancouver, and I was there with my colleague. And this guy came and joined us at the table because there was the cafe was full up and we had the only spare seat. And he said, "Well, can I join you?" I said, "Come on up." And we said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to Vancouver." And we went, "Oh, that's amazing. So are we. What takes you to Vancouver?" He said, "Oh, I'm going to a conference." I went, "Oh, that sounds exciting. What sort of conference?" He went, "Well, I'm going to a conference to discover my inner divinity." And I went, "Wow, that sounds amazing. Your inner divinity. What's all that about then?" He went, "Well, it's very simple." He said, it's the amazing thing is, he said, I'm God and you're God and your colleague is God. And so I don't think Rick's God. Trust me, I work with him. Anyway, everybody is God. The barista is God and that guy over there is God. I went, "That sounds amazing." So then my colleague piped in and said, "Does this go true in history too? Like every human being who's ever lived is part of the divine?" And this guy goes, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And then I went, "So that's amazing. So like Gandhi and Mother Teresa." And he went, yes. I went, "Pol Pot and Hitler and Stalin." And he's like, "Oh no, oh no, not those guys." And that, of course, I'll stop the story there. That opened up a really interesting conversation about, okay, so how do you decide if someone's good enough to be part of God and bad enough that not? And we got to the gospel through that. So that's just one story. That's a new agey type of story. But there's a few of those kind of examples. One thing, Rob, I've discovered that with folks from other cultural backgrounds and especially other religious backgrounds, you've got a really good opportunity. You know, like if you meet someone at your workplace, at your office, say who's a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever, to sort of say, "Hey, forgive me for asking, but I understand you're a Muslim, right?" And if they go, "Yes, I am," to go, "Well, may I ask you a couple of questions? Because I've never really talked to a Muslim before. Tell me what you believe. I'd love to know." And if you do that genuinely curious, as curious as you can, people love talking about themselves. And then when you've asked lots of questions, there's a very natural opportunity, I've always found, to say, "Well, this is interesting. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus, and some of the things you've talked about we would have in common. Actually, there are some similarities, but there are also some big differences. For example, and you're away, but because you've listened, they're far more willing to, I think, to listen to you describe those differences. You don't have to sit there and go, "Well, I think you're wrong for 3 reasons." You just go, "Well, for example, I would have a very different view of Jesus to you." But this works true for culture too. So I love it meeting people from different backgrounds. We one of those university missions I mentioned the other week. One of the missions weeks I was doing, they had an international dinner every night because it's a very multicultural campus, and it was phenomenal. On one evening, I had a table full of Russians. On one evening, I had a table full of Pakistanis. Another evening, a table full of Chinese and Japanese, and it was really fun. And also to get people's stories, and also you're dealing with people often who know nothing about Christianity. Like one of the Pakistani guys, it's brilliant. Sure. We got chatting, and he says to me, he says, "Oh, he said, I'm only been in this country about 3-4 months doing this maths course." He's like, I guess I'm a Muslim. I'm not really sure how seriously I take it, which is interesting. But you're a Christian. I went, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Forgive me for asking." He said, "A pretty obvious question. You Christians have the Bible, right?" I went, "Yeah, that's right." He said, "What is the Bible? I've heard the word, but what is it?" I thought, what an amazing question. He had no presuppositions. He knew nothing at all about the Bible other than Christians had this book. And it was just really fun to engage with somebody who was a bit like a sponge. So I think look out for people whose stories are different, Rob. Yeah, take an interest, ask good questions, and people love talking about themselves.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that because it's other focused. It's not self-focused like, how do I get us to the gospel? But it's rather, let me open the door. And then going all the way back to one of the first things you mentioned in our chat today, it's up to this Holy Spirit. So we can step into a conversation, and we don't need to close the deal, to use a sales term, right? It's the
Yeah, love
Holy
it.
Spirit, but we can just say, Lord, use me. And a lot of times when I'm talking to folks, especially from other countries I've been in, or other ethnicities here in the U.S., I'm always kind of praying one ear to heaven. What can I say? What's interesting? And before I know it, this is my own personal experience, though. Once you get the story and you start understanding where they grew up and what their dad wanted them to do, you're into the life story of a human being, and it's super interesting. And you don't feel like you're in the middle of this exercise anymore. It's a conversation between human beings, and
Absolutely.
that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think while you're listening, of course, be praying for those opportunities. But and
Absolutely,
also, I
yeah.
think look for ways you can sympathise. So I haven't done this myself, but I got a good friend of mine who sees quite a lot of fruit from, when you're talking, if you meet someone on a plane or in a setting where, not an office environment, somewhere where it's a stranger, and you find out what they do, look for an opportunity to say something like, gosh, that must be a really difficult job, and try and find some opportunity for why it might be difficult. So if they're a teacher, you go, that must be a really difficult job. Classroom full of kids and high energy, and discipline in schools is bad. That must be really tough. Firstly, you've taken an interest. If somebody opens up and goes, "Oh, it is sometimes," and then of course you've got a natural. So how do you manage when life is tough and it's stressful and work is getting you down and you just want to throw the customers through the window? What gets you through? Because you can see
Right.
where I'm going with this. You're laying the ground for then going, interesting. I haven't always found work easy myself. It's my kind of background. I'm very grateful actually to my faith in God has often helped get me through some of those tough times. You're getting anything gets you a bit deeper than the surface level. So finding ways when you can identify, finding ways when you can show that you've really thought about what the other person has said. And one last thought, by the way, just on this, we won't go down this rabbit trail because it could be a big one. But the other thing I've discovered over the years from others. So all the best ideas in the book, Rob, by the way, come from others. They're not me. I just popularize them.
I think
But
that
one of
was
my
Mark Twain that said that. He said the most original people are those who hide their sources the best. I think
Love
that's
it.
what he
I,
said.
I would take that to the bank.
Yeah.
One of my favorite
Yeah.
writers is a late 19th, early 20th century Australian Baptist preacher called F.W. Boreham, who wrote loads of books. He was a brilliant kind of communicator and evangelist, and really gifted writer. So I collect his books, but he's got a lovely phrase in one of his books where he talks about excuse me, the need for Christians to sample infinity in our reading. So read really widely, take an interest in lots of things. Reason being, when you bump into somebody, at the bus stop, and you're chatting away, and it turns out that they're into, I don't know, they're into fishing or something, you'll be so grateful that you read that book the previous Christmas on fly fishing, because then you say, do you know what, I read a book on fishing once and it really interested me, and you've made a connection. So, and I love that idea of read widely. So in our reading, in our media
Yeah.
sampling, this is an important one. If you listen to this and you lean Republican, as probably a lot of your audience do, don't just read the Republican stuff. Read the Democrat stuff, and vice versa. Whatever
Yes.
sort of films
Yeah.
you're into, occasionally bust outside your genre. Watch something different. The Barbie movie last year was a good example. I mean, pink chaos, but you know what? By watching it. But the opportunities you have when you come across someone who says, "Oh, that Barbie movie was great," it might not be the last thing you'd ever watch, but if you've gone, "Do you know what? I watched that too, and I quite enjoyed that scene where," and you've built a connection. So
Right.
read widely, watch widely, sample infinity, because then we're again finding ways where, like Paul in Athens, you can make that connection to people.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I love that. And not just widely, I would say, but deeply. Like
Yes.
again, we'll go back to C.S. Lewis, who would talk about you have to constantly be reading old books as well, not
Oh
just
my
new
word,
books.
I love an old book. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting to see the way people thought, the way they dealt with this particular issue, and then you read what's going on today. And yeah, that's brilliant. But it also brings me back to the idea or the word that keeps coming to mind, which is curiosity. Read
Yes.
curiously. I love that because it's all God's world. And this is a lot of times what I think about is Revelation 7, and the 12 tribes of Israel are there, right? But also you've got the tribe, people from every tribe and nation and tongue all gathered around. And what I love is it's not this homogenous,
Yeah.
uniformity. It's this beautiful diversity that's part of the
Oh yeah.
kingdom of God. So if you're talking to a table full of folks from Pakistan or China or Russia, you're sampling some of God's diversity
Yeah,
on the globe. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
I
And
think that's
by
a
the
beautiful
way,
way
'cause
to
I know
approach it.
like me, we like a bit of apologetics. I think that's an untapped apologetic argument, because today we live in an age where diversity really matters. People take it very, very seriously, and rightly. We're in an age where
Right.
we're much more aware of that. I always look, particularly when I'm talking to students, one of the arguments I like is to say to people, if you care about culture and diversity, if you think diversity really matters, then you need to be a Christian. And the reason you need to be a Christian is no other worldview gives you a basis for diversity. On atheism, diversity doesn't matter. All that matters, quite frankly, is, well, maybe genetic diversity a little bit. But other than that, all that matters is you pass your genes on to the
Yeah.
next generation. Atheism, naturalism has no place for culture. It's all a total accident. Most other religions haven't really moved outside the culture really in which they were born. So it started. So Islam, yes, it's worldwide, but you pray in Arabic, you pray facing Mecca, you go on pilgrimage to Mecca. It's an Arabian faith. The majority of the world's Buddhists still live in the region of Asia where Buddhism began. But Christianity, it started in the Middle East, it spread out and became an Asian faith, then it became an African faith, it became a European faith, it came across the Atlantic with the
Right.
Pilgrim Fathers, it became an American faith. Now it's gone south, it's a Latin American faith. China is almost the world's biggest Christian country. Iran is the fastest growing church. And we have this amazing vision that you've described of people from every tribe and tongue worshipping God, because God cares about culture. Every culture for the Christian, for the Bible, has something of the image of God in it, something we can celebrate. Every culture has some flaws that need addressing with the truth of the gospel. But if you care about
Mhm.
culture, then come on home, because Christianity is the place that you belong.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's so true. It's unity, but not uniformity. That's always how I put
That's
it.
right.
And that's, this is the reason we're not anti-Semitic or racist. This is the reason we're not all these other things, misogynistic or whatever, because everybody was made in God's image. And that's so beautiful. Sometimes you get hit for that as a Christian, like, well, you've got this many denominations and everyone does it differently, and as if that's a
Yeah.
bad thing. Um, Good.
Yes,
So,
although again, it's always fun, isn't it? There, when someone asks that, Rob, is to go, to say to people, "Hey, that's a really good question, but have you noticed that actually underneath all that surface diversity, Christians are united around some pretty clear fundamentals?" I mean, I'll say to people,
yeah,
I believe in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. My Catholic friends believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. My Eastern Orthodox friends believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We all believe that Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary, had a 3-year ministry with amazing miracles and teaching, crucified, raised from the dead 3 days later. You are aware that that all Christians who have ever lived, despite the diversity around church structure and everything else, we are united around the fundamentals. Maybe the fundamentals are worth taking a look at, eh?
you are a master. That's what I said up front. Yeah, that's a great
Well,
way
I
to
wouldn't
put
go that far. I just like an argument. So.
it. But you are also intellectually curious, and I love that. So let me ask you this: when you in the book, and we'll kind of wrap up with this. I also want to give you a chance to share where people can get a hold of you and learn what you do,
Thank you.
and get the book. But in the book, are you dealing with, like, what's the framework that you offer? Do you give them specific types of questions? Is it maybe some of what you've been talking about here
Yeah.
today? Or what sorts of things would someone
Mm.
learn from the book that would be
Yeah.
helpful in their day to day?
Well, I'd say the big things that you will learn from the brightest, yellowest evangelism book you'll ever read. First thing I think I do, Rob, I hope I'll help people think through what holds them back from evangelism, because it's good to recognize what are the things we're actually afraid of, and how do we deal with that. And sometimes I've noticed some evangelism books sort of go the sort of motivational coach approach of going, come on, pull yourselves together, you bunch of lightweights. I don't take that approach. I try and actually be a bit more helpful and going, okay, what's going on? Why are we afraid? And how do we deal with these practically and spiritually? Then there's the questions that I teach people. And yeah, there are really sort of 3 main questions plus a bonus one. I teach people how to ask questions about the questions that were asked. I'm not the first person to do that, but hopefully I do that in a very accessible way. But the big centerpiece of the book is what I call the wandering question, which is you can use that with people who would say they're not any religion, the nuns, NONES. You can use it with people on the faith. It's the curiosity question, as you so wonderfully put it. I love that word, curiosity. I need to
I've
use that a
just
bit more.
trademarked it while we were talking, just
Oh,
in
there we
case
go.
you're
Well,
thinking.
the check's in the mail,
Yeah.
and then thirdly, I also, there is some quite good apologetic stuff in there. I teach a little framework that you can go through with any apologetic, with any question, that you get a series of steps that even if you are an expert apologist, even if you are William Lane Craig or Alvin Plantinga or something, that can be just helpful to remember as we engage people. But if you're not, if you're a mere mortal, that will help you get your teeth stuck in. So really, I would say it's a book. There's really two audiences, I think, behind the Yellow Book. One is somebody who's never really done much evangelism, doesn't know much about apologetics. Perhaps they're a new Christian or a fairly young Christian. It will really get you started. It's also for the apologetic pros who are so strong in the apologetics. They've got every argument nailed down and tightened down, and it looks amazing. But they sometimes forget the art of then conversing with people in a way that wins people's hearts. And so that book, I hope, if you're that kind of person listening to this, they listen to your show all the time, they know all the arguments, but we still need, for those of us who are wired that way, a little refresher course sometimes on, okay, you got the arguments. Now let's help you learn how to actually take them into conversation.
That's beautiful. Yeah, great. So you kind of wrote to both types of idiots. I like that.
I've tried both types of idiots. And as I say, I'm not writing. I'm very clear to people on the title. I'm not saying you are an idiot. It's how to stop you looking.
I just love that humor. That's great. No, and that's what makes some of your work fun. I mean, I was first introduced to you with the work you've done, in the Islamic world. I think that's why you were actually here in my neighborhood. Abdu Murray.
Oh yes, Abdu's an old friend. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I forget anyway, you were in town for that. And anyway, I love that. And I really like that you've put out this book, which is really quite practical. I know just knowing you, your sense of humor, it's probably going to be a great read. I haven't got through it yet, but I feel like this is a really great, for the average Christian, I guess you called it, what do you call it? A guidebook or something? The opportunity, because a lot of people think about that, in our Great Commission, go and make disciples. And so that involves, and the number one sphere is public speaking, which can include one-on-one conversations, especially about something like Jesus. So what a great way to help people kind of work their way through it. And I love the idea of consider this a practice conversation, with your Uber driver or the waitress or whatever you do. I mean, it's a great way to say, look, I want to be kingdom minded and I want to be open to opportunities that God's going to put in front of me to be able to help share my faith at least. And if not, share the gospel and bring someone to faith. That's amazing that you're equipping people for that. So thank you for that work.
That's very kind of you. And it's been, I've enjoyed this conversation tremendously. So it's been a real privilege being on the show.
So how can people, what's a good place for people to get a hold of you? I'm sure your book's available anywhere, so they can just look up.
My book is available anywhere where good books are sold, and even places where bad books are sold. You may find my book as well. Yeah, I mean, you can get it from one of the big online ones. I always recommend to Christians, do try and support your local Christian bookstore, an independent bookstore as well, but you can get it anywhere you like. And if people want to find me more generally, Rob, the best way to find me is just to Google Andy Bannister, and you will find me. I'm on social media, at the Solas website, which is a slightly complicated website because it's a historic URL that could be better. But that's Solas, SOLAS -cpc.org. But if you Google me, you'll find me. And then on the Solas website, people will find loads of free resources, videos, articles, and other bits and pieces to help support the book. Whether you're looking for resources you can share with a non-Christian friend, or you want to go a bit deeper into evangelism and apologetics yourself. So do check me out on social media. Ping me a message. I always try and respond to anyone, whether you are saying rude things or kind things.
Beautiful. Yeah, and we'll put the links in the description for this video.
That's very kind. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for your time today, Andy. You've blessed us.
Well, it's been great. Thanks again for the conversation. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Shalom.